Welcome to Shalom World. My name is Patricia Keane and we are coming to you from Maynooth, County Kildare in Ireland. I'm introducing a 12-part series on pornography called The Porn Disaster. Pornography is harmful. It isn't so much about the addiction.
This is a multifaceted industry that continues to make money off of this.
With anything pleasureful that happens, and if it happens often enough and long enough, you can get changes in the brain.
The wrongful use of freedom leads to captivity.
The pornography reality is so dangerous for us.
In today's episode, we are moving from children and porn to adults and porn. We're going to be looking at what does porn look like, porn addiction look like in an adult? How does a person get there in addiction? And what does neuroscience, medicine and psychology and psychiatry say about the brain that is constantly watching porn? So I want to introduce you to my guest today.
Professor Patricia Casey, Professor of Psychiatry at University College Dublin, Ireland. She is a psychiatrist, journalist, and commentator on social issues. Father Chris Hayden, priest from the Diocese of Ferns, Ireland. Spiritual Director, St. Patrick's Seminary, Maynooth. Father Alan Hoffa, priest from the Diocese of Allentown, USA. He has BA in Philosophy and Masters in Divinity. Dr. Kielty Oberlin. She's from Ireland, doctorate in psychology and master's in counseling, specializing in eating disorder recovery.
So we've got a lot to say on this one today. Professor Casey, you are the expert here when it comes to what pornography does to the brain. But we're going to be coming to that in a couple of minutes because there's a couple of questions that I want to run with before I get to you. So, Father Chris, I'm going to you first for this one. There's the debate that adults are free to engage in whatever consensual activities they choose to do. And if we compromise this fundamental freedom, are we on a slippery slope? Is there any substance to that belief, or is it based on a defective understanding of freedom?
All of the above. There is some substance to it because we have free will, we can choose freely, but it's defective and profoundly defective in that the wrongful exercise of freedom leads to captivity. It's self-undermining. The world's prisons are full of people who exercise their freedom. And what's needed, if we come up against this instant kind of gut reaction roadblock, how dare you tell me, how dare you legislate against my pleasures and so on, I'm free to do as I will. Well, there's a philosophical underpinning that we need to have here. What constitutes freedom? And for us as Catholics, and it's also a solid humanistic understanding, it's not some obscure little Catholic doctrine. Freedom is freedom to choose what is good. It's freedom to choose what conduces to human flourishing. And that in turn requires a vision of what the human person is. Because if I don't know what I am fundamentally, then I don't know what helps me to become what I am. If I don't have a self to aspire to, if I don't have a sense of what it is to live a good life as a free human person. Let me just give you a little analogy regarding the use and misuse of freedom. If I am struggling with an alcohol dependency and I find myself alone in my favourite store, which happens to be a liquor store, and I have unlimited funds and there's nobody there with me to bother me, in principle, that's a situation of freedom. I'm free to do just what I want. But in order for me to remain free as a human being, I need someone to come along and take me captive and bring me to a different place in order to preserve my freedom. So the whole discourse around freedom, it needs to be more subtle. We need to remember that freedom, that the wrongful use of freedom leads to captivity. And that's a broad principle. And when we come to pornography, then we can see that it plays out at an individual level and in many ways at a societal level.
Father Alan, I'm going to you for this one. Some argue that porn can't be addictive because it doesn't introduce a foreign substance into the human body. Still, when we consider gambling, it is generally recognised as an addiction, as pathological gambling is included in the DSM. In what sense is porn addictive in adults?
One of the big things that we see is the alternate reality. How many of us have at times in our life wished that we had a different reality? We wish that our financial situation or our work situation or our personal situation was different. And so we go off and we desire that. And when we can find something, it's attractive to us. One of the things that is definitely underlying porn is this fantasy reality, especially as it regards our human sexuality. And so if I have this opportunity where I have very little commitment, where all the work is being done for me, and I have this opportunity to enter into that, and there's an arousal template that's there as well, that is the huge attraction value. And so all of that comes together in almost a substance. It is the substance of pornography that is drawing me in and makes it something that I want to be a part of, and then I create this need, this overwhelming need. And we'll hear today, especially how that affects the brain and every other part of the body, all the way down to the reality of our soul. And so all of those factors coming together, especially the fantasy piece and the lack of work and commitment, especially because of the ease of access that we have now, that a person can just pop open their phone and it's right there. They don't have, we talked about those 5 A's, the fact that there's anonymity in it, the fact that it's accessible. One of the big things is that it's free. You don't have to pay for it. It's affordable. And all of those things coming together are really what make this a very addictive reality, and especially because of its ease and how pervasive it is.
Just a question that I'm just going off here for a moment, because I just want to ask this. At what point do people start paying for pornography?
In my experience, one of the big areas is when pornography has morphed into other things. So we talk about this downward spiral. People usually start out with looking at what would be considered, quote, normal porn, the pornography that is between a man and a woman having sexual relations. But then it turns into all different things. It can get to situations of BDSM, people who are completely desensitized to child pornography.
Okay. Can you explain what BDSM is?
So when you talk about bondage, sodomy, so we're talking about really hardcore realities of things that would be outside of the normal human-to-human conjugal act. But then in addition to that, what you see at times is that it does, for some people, it isn't enough as they continue down that spiral. And so where the money gets into is prostitution, people paying for different things of that reality, because when, again, it gets to the mind, the arousal template that they need, it keeps deepening and deepening, and they need more and more. So again, what does that sound like? It sounds like a person who gets started in very low-level drugs, and then it accelerates. So it's the same reality. And again, when we talk about the brain chemistry, there's so much crossover in how that happens with us, which is why the pornography reality is so dangerous for us.
In episode 1, we were looking at the exponential growth of pornography over the last 25 years, and we were looking at a figure of 97 billion in income that the industry generated in 2022. So is this where all of that income is coming from, what you're talking about when you escalate up along and you want to watch harder porn? Is that where you start paying for it?
Well, not necessarily. The reality of the pay is, hey, guess what? Everybody's going there. So you get different people who are getting ads in there and different things. So this is a multifaceted industry that continues to make money off of this. And then they reinvest that money into getting more and more people hooked, and so there's multiple points to this, and that's why we had to spread this out in a 12-part series, is because there's so many different angles in which this is being pervasive.
Yes, a couple of people contacted me just to ask me how that 97 billion is generated. So I wanted to clarify that.
Mm-hmm. You can have paid sites and things like that, but again, because of all that there is free out there, when you look at the top 10 websites yearly in their production, 3 of those top 10 in the world are pornography sites, and they're free pornography sites. Yes, they will hold certain things that can be paid for, but in the large part, it's free, and it's other ways that advertisers and other things are giving money for this to continually be promulgated.
And the free bit is the hook. Mm-hmm. That's the bait. Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Thank you for clarifying that, Professor Casey. It's been remarked that one of the most destructive things about pornography is that it stimulates brain chemicals and neurochemicals, endorphins, dopamine and serotonin, for which the body is its suppliers. So I want to get an understanding of how this happens. and the breakdown of what the endorphins are and dopamine and serotonin. And you're all very welcome to come in on this one because it's quite a big one. Is this where, with these neurochemicals, is this where the person gets hooked on it?
It is, but can I take us back to something more fundamental? Yes. People forget that every action we do, so me moving my hands, there's stuff going on in my brain as I'm moving my hands. Everything we do, you're nodding your head. There's something going on. There's something happening. And what's happening is that there are signals going through the brain, through parts of the brain, through the neurons in the brain, which in total form the brain, and passing between those are chemicals facilitating the transmission. And that's where adrenaline, also called epinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, all of those play a part. So all of these things are whizzing round through our brain and going between brain cells. And they're in other parts of the body as well, but for our purposes here, we're talking about the brain. They really are central to the brain. And so whenever we do any action, something happens in our brain. So when we engage in the action of looking at pornography, if we're enjoying it, the chemicals, the neurochemicals that are associated with reward and pleasure will be released. For example, dopamine is a big one. So if you eat a bar of chocolate, if you like chocolate, or if you have a nice glass of wine, dopamine is released because you're getting pleasure from it. With pornography, dopamine is released also. Oxytocin is also released when you view pornography. And oxytocin is very well known. It's known as the bonding hormone. And women are particularly conscious of it because when women are delivering a baby, oxytocin is produced, and that is actually stimulates the womb to contract and result in the birth of the baby. But it also stimulates the bonding between the mother and baby just after childbirth. So oxytocin is released as well. And oxytocin gives people a warm feeling. When people have sex, oxytocin is released, and that gives people a warm, cuddly feeling after intercourse. And so with pornography, all of these things are being released. And with anything pleasureful that happens, and if it happens often enough and long enough, you can get changes in the brain. And that's because of what's called brain plasticity. And so that's why people recover from strokes, because they get new neurons growing to compensate for the damage that's happened. Similarly with pornography, when people are watching pornography, and the younger you watch it, the younger the brain, the more plastic it is. So when young people start watching pornography, their brain is going to produce new pathways that involve dopamine. And so all of these dopamine producing nerve endings are multiplying in the brain over time. And the brain becomes saturated. And so every time you watch porn, there's loads of dopamine. You think it's wonderful. You get a great pleasureful feeling from it. And then as the surge drops, you want more, so you go and seek more. So that's the one thing that happens. You get a lot of dopamine going around the brain, and you get the newly developing nerves. But the other thing that sometimes happens is that the brain will when there's a brain overload of dopamine, it'll shut down. And so in order to get more dopamine, when the dopamine shuts down, people go for more and more extreme forms of porn. So ultimately, they become hooked. So as to keep the dopamine surge going the whole time, they have to constantly look at porn and look at more and more porn.
Can I just stop you there to ask you, so when they get a drop in the dopamine, how is the person feeling?
They feel low in mood, they feel anxious, they feel irritable, they feel cut off, isolated. All of those kinds of emotions are associated with the drop. But above all, they just want the pleasure for feeling, the nice cuddly feeling that they experience during the viewing of whatever it is that's giving them the kick, as it were.
So how fast does that drop happen?
If people are using it regularly, it happens very quickly. And so they're stimulated more and more to seek it out. So it's self-reinforcing. Dopamine is self-reinforcing. The more you drink alcohol and enjoy it, the more you're going to drink. If you've got that vulnerability, not everybody, but there are certain people who are vulnerable, and so the more you will engage in that behavior. So to come back to one of the early questions you asked, addiction isn't about substances being put into your body. The substances are already in your brain. It's what's stimulating them, and that can be from substances you take into your body, like opiates or cigarettes or alcohol, or from external substances like gaming, like pornography.
We have been talking about the harm that pornography does. Okay, and we've been trying to impress that upon the listeners that pornography is harmful. And it isn't so much about the addiction. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, obviously from a non-clinical perspective, yes. we did say in one of our earlier segments, we were talking about the whole question of addiction, and certainly as well in general conversation, the nature of addiction. We don't need to close on the question of addiction, and there's no specific reference to pornography addiction in the DSM or in the ICD, the latest incarnations of those psychiatric manuals. But that doesn't. You don't have to be an addict to be harmed, any more than you need to be an alcoholic to be harmed by a drinking pattern. And pornography, it corrodes. It's inherently corrosive, and we need to keep that before us. But some people may experience great vulnerability and harm, damage, without ever becoming addicts. Really, if we imagine a small child, a 10-year-old, being exposed to hardcore pornography, the traumatizing effect of that, stuff that can surface many years later, we don't need to posit addiction in order to say that this is tremendously harmful. And another thing as well, and it's been part of our conversations, and this is a cold comfort. There is no particular profile of personality we can point and say, yeah, you're liable to have a problem with pornography, and therefore you're not that type, so you're fine. You can go ahead, look at it with impunity. It's not that simple. Anybody can be vulnerable. So there are enough unknowns out there to keep us all mindful of the fundamental principle, which is also a fundamental moral principle, that this is not good and it's to be avoided.
Professor, I'm coming back to you again on this, on the brain. So we're talking about the brain developing new neural pathways. With long-term use of pornography, can the brain recover? If somebody stops watching pornography, can the brain recover?
I think it can. We don't know enough yet, and there aren't enough studies to demonstrate that. For example, let me backtrack. You don't see any brain abnormalities in the brains of people who are addicted to pornography, or indeed addicted to most of the sort of behavioural phenomena, for the simple reason that the changes happen at a molecular level rather than at a gross level. So you won't see shrinkage in the brain or white spots here and there, like you would if somebody had a stroke or a tumour. But what you do get is at a molecular level, you get changes. And there's very sophisticated and expensive scanning doing those kinds of studies and investigations now, but they're very new because the technology is very new. It's extremely expensive, and so we don't have all of these fundamental answers yet. Certainly people do get over other addictions by abstinence, and that allows the parts of the brain, I guess, to recalibrate. So that they no longer feel the same attraction or the same urge or the same need to engage in the behaviour. But quite when that happens, I can't answer that. Father Alan, maybe you can speak.
We might leave that into the next episode 9, because the clock is ticking away there in front of me. And I think
that's a really good thing to look forward to, because there's other things that we can talk to too about those neurochemicals. So we'll bait our viewers into the next episode to come and hear more.
Okay. Well, in our next episode, we are going to be continuing with adults on porn and what it does to the brain. Also, we're going to be looking at several myths around pornography. That the idea that, listen, pornography is here to stay and we got to get used to it, but it's what we can do about that. And we're going to be we're going to be bringing some of this into the next segment. So, Father, a prayer, please.
Certainly. We've been speaking in general human terms about the reality, and as Christians we can go right to the heart of the matter. My adorable Jesus, may our feet journey together, may our hands gather together in unity, may our hearts beat in unison, may our souls be in harmony, may our thoughts be as one, may our ears listen to the silence together, may our glances profoundly penetrate each other, may our lips pray together to gain mercy from the eternal Father. Amen.
So to you, my guest today, thank you for coming in and being part of what has been a tremendous series. The learning in it is really just fantastic. So until our next series, thank you very much for watching, and thank you for joining us on Shalom World.